On this week's episode of the Jesse T Show, the amazing and powerful Janie Liou, founder of Prime Purpose, also musician and creator. So, Janie, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you and connect with you. And I know that there's a lot that you're into and that you've created and that you've built over your time in life and in business. And you're really big on tying those things together because we're more than just one thing. We're not just our jobs. We're not just our occupation, but we are so many things that we do. And as you are the founder of Prime Purpose, you're a coach, you're a mentor, but you do other things. You're a musician, you're a creator, and I want to share your journey with the world because I think it's pretty badass. So if you could just tell us a little bit about your story.
I appreciate that. Well, my journey started as a musician. That's my trade. And I've been independent, owned my own record label for many years and come up with different projects. The thing that really hit me was through the years, I figured out that I was kind of stuck. I felt like I was in this one-dimensional journey where I loved music, but I felt like I wasn't expressing all of me and who I was. And it was actually, ironically, through working with social justice programs. I spent about 5 years fighting sex trafficking and working with different organizations, and I realized a whole new realm opened up for me to use my music, not only to help people, but bring organizations together. And I discovered not only did I enjoy helping people, but that was more meaningful to me than just making music and a product.
Yep. And so there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, just being someone who is a creator and a musician, but also you're fighting the good fight, so to speak, and bringing attention and bringing a voice to this awful epidemic of human trafficking. And for those who don't know, Atlanta is like one of the hubs for human trafficking in the world. And so I didn't realize that until a few years ago, until I've heard it a couple times since then. But what was it that you feel like you were able to accomplish in those 5 years? The message that was being delivered to people, like how were you getting your information out to the world so they could be aware of this? And like, what are some of the changes you thought you were able to help?
I think I realized that it was on different dimensions. One was I wanted to bring awareness to the problem. And so one campaign that I worked on with several organizations was to lobby for legislation and go after the perpetrators and protect the victims. Because as you know, with trafficking, a lot of times it's the underage sex workers that are prosecuted for crimes that they're not guilty of, they're victims. And so that was one avenue. And then the second part was going after the perpetrators. We did this campaign called End Demand. And that was basically to educate the population. You know, you think of business as a product, right? Supply and demand. Well, this is one of the most sinister types of businesses there is. And so you want to create an end to that demand. And so we were teaching, I wrote a song called Dear John, to basically go after the perpetrators and help them understand most of the time when they're participating in these horrible things, they're actually victimizing young women. And so that was an education piece. And also the last part of it was raising awareness about aftercare programs. So for me, I think the most touching part of the whole journey was actually getting to meet former, I don't like to use the word slaves because they're liberated basically, but former victims in rehabilitation, helping them to come out not only healed, but they can actually contribute to society afterwards.
There's a noble calling there, like an effort to put an end to something that's so heinous and so, like you said, sinister, to take the words that you mentioned. And for those that don't know, there's many people that probably don't know how deep this awful business, as you call it, goes. What are some of the things to look out for people that, actually just kind of a thing that I've noticed is there's a park that I go to and that I run. It's in Lost Mountain, kind of over by Powder Springs, Georgia. And inside the restroom, there's a sign on the wall that says if you're being held against your will, if you're working for little or no pay, basically if you're being trafficked, like, sold for sex, all this stuff, like how does someone outside of like those things just kind of hitting them out of the blue and say, oh, this world exists. Like, how does somebody find out about this and know that it exists? And like, how do how did you bring attention to making a difference in this field?
I think it's a lot simpler than people make it out to be. When I first started hearing about it, it was through my church, and I was really obviously disturbed by the whole thing.
Sure.
And I thought, how can I do something? It feels too big. How can I begin to tackle it? And for me, it was just learning about the situation. I mean, I was already a musician, but I knew I couldn't just jump in and suddenly create a platform for it. I wanted to get educated. And so I started attending, finding about organizations that fought the issue. And then I started realizing, oh, these organizations work together.
Okay.
So I reached out to them a lot of times via email or somebody I knew. I'd start attending meetings. Sometimes they would do races. I mean, it's so many people do 5Ks, 10Ks.
Sure.
It's really easy to find a cause like this that you can easily get on board with and it not be like a huge deal.
Yep. And so for your like the musician side of things, the musicianship, I know you actually graciously came into the conversation today and handed me a few CDs that you've created or been a part of. What has that been able to do in terms of driving the mission or getting the point across to people? Like how did the music marry to the mission?
This was what was so revolutionary to me, was when I finally decided to do something about it and create music. When I wrote that song, Dear John, I was already in relationship with organizations. I was actively asking them questions to make sure that I was sensitive to the issue and not doing something that was outside of what they would deem as their message. And then working with them, everything from fundraising, concerts, to they would have a lobby day where they would respectfully lobby the lawmakers at the Capitol to make sure this law got passed for a certain issue that they cared about. So for me, that was the beginning of, oh, so my music's not just a product. It can actually be a part of a movement instead of just a brand. Yep.
And so during the 5 years of you basically campaigning and waging war against this, like what were some of the things that you learned about the trafficking industry? What were some of the, if you had any during that amount of time? Because it's hard to make significant change quickly, and 5 years is fairly quickly when it comes to something like this, but were you able to see any resounding or any like wins that you would call it through those 5 years?
I think the biggest one for me, honestly, was what was not seen.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is when I saw the organizations that worked together, and it's funny how we talk about threefold a lot, but it was threefold in that it was tackling all these different parts of the industry. Like we said earlier, the awareness, the legislation, and the aftercare. And by the time I ended up finishing out my time with it at the end of the 5 years, I knew that it was my time to go.
Okay.
That was for a season.
Yep.
And I was assured there was an infrastructure there. So it's not that the issue is completely done with. You're always going to be fighting it.
Sure.
But I actually noticed that at the time that there were established organizations that were even starting to pull out, not because they were discouraged, but they saw that, wow, we're making some inroads with this. They don't need us anymore.
Yep. Okay, so you were able to see some transition for the better. And so going back to your music career and taking a sidestep from the trafficking piece, when did you find, I guess maybe it found you, your career, or you found it? Like when did you pick up an instrument, or tell us a little bit about that side of things?
Sure. Probably about the time I was 6 years old, I started taking piano lessons, and I'm from suburban Alpharetta. I'm from a small town. It's not small anymore, but at the time it was.
Sure.
And, being this Asian American girl in the South, it was a very different kind of way of growing up. And so I would just sit there, and probably about the time that I was about 10 years old, I would just tinker around with the piano other than the lessons I was taking.
Sure.
And when I was a teenager, I started writing songs.
Okay.
And my church would have a lot of these conferences, and that's where I found a way to start playing those songs.
Putting out your creations and things that you've built and wrote. And so what was your musical style kind of that you were, trying to put out into the world?
At the time, I was still trying to explore. I mean, I was an 80s kid, so I loved all the pop 80s music. But then when I got into college, I was in college about the mid-90s. There were so many female artists they wrote their own songs, they played their own instruments, and it was a really, really great time to be in music. So I actually didn't start off doing music. I had gone to Emory University, and then I transferred halfway through because I wasn't happy. Yep. And coming from an Asian family, as you know, usually creative endeavors are not they're not encouraged. But somehow they knew this was my passion. So I ended up
They were supportive.
Yeah, eventually they were.
Okay.
And I transferred to Belmont University in Nashville, and I finished out with a music degree there.
That's awesome. And so what was Nashville? What was that experience like for you? Because I know that's like one of the focal points for music in the United States.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved that it had that small town feel. But, you know, a lot of people think it's just country music, and it's great for that. There's that in the CCM industry, but they had so many different genres too, and a lot of different venues.
Yep.
So it was a really great place for me to, being at Belmont, you had musicians everywhere. So you could jam, you could get together, you could play on each other's demos. And it was just a great time. I got to intern at different music industry places and get a sense of what it was like. I loved it.
That's awesome. So you were kind of in the mecca for creativity and for being around other artists and being able to, like you said, jam together and create things together. So where did that road take you after Belmont? Was that directly into like a paid gig, or were you kind of just trying to get work where you could? Like, how did that transition work?
That's really honestly where my journey started.
Okay.
Because this has now been 20 years, because I graduated in the late 90s. And I thought I had this whole plan in my head that I was going to get a day job, and then I was going to go to that day job, and then I would play, record, and do those things by night, I had no idea the trajectory the next 20 years being in and out of these different industries. I was so frustrated. It didn't look anything like I thought it was going to.
Never does, yeah.
Yeah, and I realized, looking back, and that's actually when I started to write this book. This book is called The Power of Inclusion: 7 Stages to a Highly Thriving Work Culture. The reason I wrote it is, when I look back at those 20 years, I finally started to see very clearly in front of me, like with a bird's eye view, going in through all these different industries. There's corporate, there's for-profit, nonprofit, faith-based, non-faith-based, entrepreneur, there's the arts entertainment industry. Yep. And I started to see the structures of them for what they were, and I was like, I need to really be able to help people see this, because I thought, I'm just at this job to pay my bills. I'm just doing this for my livelihood. And I didn't realize until looking back, it's like I had a purpose at that job.
Yep.
I wouldn't have never learned this if I hadn't been at that place. And I have a compassion for people. I really like to see just who they are and their potential, no matter what situation they're in. And I never would have seen that if I hadn't gone through all that.
So being able to have that real life experience versus just kind of not seeing it firsthand really changed your perception and mindset on things.
Absolutely.
So what was the next iteration from there? Like, were you still in the music kind of world a little bit, and then getting your foot into the career that you're in now, or how did that transition work for you?
It was always sort of dual. I've been working on the music trades on and off for the last 20 years. And so as you saw, I would come up with an album, or sometimes I'd work on a compilation album. So I would still get to have my foot in that creative part of it, but at the same time be doing the business side of it. I think the biggest thing I learned from all of that in relationship to people is, it's not the money that was earned, it's not the project, it's not even like whatever album I was, it was the people that I was working with. And I remember that, and I'm hoping that they remember me in the same way, that in a positive way.
Sure.
So for me, it's like, okay, so now that I understand this, it's almost like I have this laser eye view where I see people and I see the potential, and I feel like that's missing in so many corporate situations.
It is, and I was talking about this with someone earlier today in terms of, there's this infrastructure set up, and I feel like it's been changing over the years, but like a lot of times people in corporate feel like they have to be political. They're not really truly being authentic. They're not really being who they are, because society and business has kind of thought or made us believe that was kind of the way to operate. But over the last few years, there's people like Brene Brown putting out content talking about being authentic and being yourself, and there's a ton of thought leaders out there, Simon Sinek, and you can name, the list goes on, right? But they talk about just being authentic and being real, and like that'll emote whatever it creates, right? And so for you and your path, and you've taken a few different passions and you've created things from them. I want to talk a little bit about I know that you had worked on, you created 2 albums and then you were on a compilation album. Talk a little bit about those experiences and like the mentality behind each album as you went along.
Sure. The first album was really about identity. I think I struggled for so many years, especially being Chinese America, and a lot of the songs on that first album, it's called Roots, because I went to China for the first time. Awesome. And I was so, I loved it. I mean, it was just not, like I said, being a minority growing up in the South and then being in a country where everybody looked like me was just it was such a reverse culture shock.
How did it feel? Like, what were some of the feelings you got from that?
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, I had traveled before to Europe, but never at a place where it's like, wow, this is my blood,
Yeah.
And I wrote this song called Beautiful because, it's funny, I'm not saying this to be narcissistic, but there's something about seeing people that look like you feel like your family.
You feel like you're home in a sense.
Yeah. And so, so many of the songs were birthed from that time there. That getting that album out, being independent, was difficult because, as you know, with a lot of people that put out their art independently and without having any kind of management, I learned a lot about everything from booking the gigs to, you know, having different ways of getting it. And at the time, that was only MySpace. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have all the different social media. I mean, I was doing in-stores still with CDs.
I believe it, yeah.
So it was a very different time. So by the time I came to my second album, I actually had to take some time off because I was dealing with some health issues.
Okay.
But I honestly didn't want to do it independently. I had looked to hire a manager, I found, and long story short, it was a really bad experience.
Was it really? What were some of the takeaways that made it not such a great experience?
I think going back to the relationships, you know, you have someone that you knew through someone else, you feel I still had a bit of a naivety where I trusted and I felt like this was a situation. I didn't want to do another album on my own. Well, long story short, he ended up backing out.
Okay.
And here I am with this fully done album and no way to promote it.
No marketing, nothing. You're just stuck.
Yeah, so I was like, well, I wrote this song called Dear John. I'm in touch with all these organizations I'm already working with to fight the sex trafficking. Let's put it all in for that.
Yep.
To me, it's like everything we did was debt free. We always put up the funds for everything. So I was like, I have nothing to lose. Yeah. I'm just going to go promote this and see if we can build some awareness for that. And so there were several campaigns that came out of that. Because that album was called The Human Condition, which it's appropriate on so many different levels.
So that next kind of process for that second album, where it was on hold for a while, you ran into some bad situations with it not being handled the way that you thought it was going to be, but then eventually you took control of it and owned it, and you were able to move it along. What was that second half of that like? Were you able to get it in front of the right people, and was it starting to kind of resonate? And what was some of the feedback people were giving you on the music?
I learned a lot. I discovered, you know, that was back in 2012. And there are people that have followed me since then. Okay. It's not a huge, I mean, I think maybe over the time that I've done this independently, it's only been like a few hundred people that have stayed with me. Yeah. There's times, like I said, dealing with health problems on and off that I wasn't even on for a couple of years.
Wow, okay.
And by the time I got back on and I had something new to share, these people stayed with me. I had this one guy write me when I was asking for feedback one time, and he said I had a song on my first album that helped him through his divorce. Wow. I mean, just that kind of feedback keeps me going. It's like just one person or just a handful of people that I've been able to help through my music. That's what kept me going.
I talk about this a lot with people. You know, I've been in and around speaking and keynoting and stuff like that. And, you know, there's people that want to walk into a room full of 1,000 people and change the lives of all 1,000. But if you can walk into a room of 1,000 people and change the life of just one person, you've completely done your job. As far as being a good human being, as far as leaving the world a little bit better than you found it. So to have that guy that wrote you the letter or talk to you about how it helped him through his divorce, like that's what really matters, right? There's people out there that'll sell, you know, they have maybe more ticket sales or they have more records or whatever the case is, but if you're actually like, people are coming back and confiding in you in a huge life transition that they were better off because of you, I mean, that's your purpose in life, right? Your prime purpose. So to talk about, you know, moving from that album, and I think, was there a compilation album after that?
Yeah, after that, because I was still heavily involved in the whole human trafficking fight, this time I teamed up with some organizations that actually had an active campaign, and it was probably a year or two in advance. Okay. It was a big New York City event called Price of Life, NYC, and it was run by University Christian Fellowship. And I had an opportunity to use my experience to put together this compilation. Awesome. Obviously because of all the semantics of studio time and getting the artists on board. And I definitely had a lot of help. There's no way. I had a team. We worked together. We kind of kept each other on our toes. But it was a really great organization. And in turn, they allowed me to be up there for 2 weeks, and I got to speak and perform in front of all these different groups, college groups, business groups. Yep. And it was a big thing. I felt very proud of being part of something like that, even though it took away from me doing more of my music. I only had one track that I contributed, but I felt like, wow, this is so much bigger than me. And I got to meet people and really just see, especially in a different city, you know, having done this in Atlanta, it was a very different situation from being in New York.
Yep. you really learn the inner workings of how to adapt and how to work within different pieces of that industry. And I'm sure there's a lot of different people that you met in different moments in time that really kind of gave you the experience that like empowered you to go off and do some other things. And so with being a musician, being a creator, but then also having business acumen and being able to pivot in a sense while keeping one thing alive over here, you decided to kind of get more into the business realm. And so was there an immediate transition from that compilation album to what you're doing now, or was there a segue? Like, what was that transition look like for you?
It was actually all over the map. Okay. I actually, to be quite honest, I never intended to go into that. I had one experience back in my early 20s, which I write about in my book, where I worked for a corporate environment.
Okay.
That was to pay the bills. And so the 1 year I was doing that, there were things I observed, and I realized, wow, this is something I should add to my arsenal. Not so much as, what I saw as an employee, but I got to see, because I've also been in situations where I've employed people as a business owner. Yep. So I've been on both sides of the fence. And having seen it as the employee and as the employer, I felt like I had, again, sort of this 360 bird's eye view of, oh, okay, this is what's going on in a corporate environment. How can I help in this situation with the employee to understand in a system? A lot of what I teach about is a system of honor. Yep. I think we've lost that in a lot of culture.
I agree. Yeah, I believe so. And so talk a little bit about what the system of honor looks like for you and how you utilize that today, either in your business or your life.
I think being really young at the time, I remember that experience of only having, again, that tunnel vision. I need to pay the bills. I really hate being at this job, but not realizing that I have an opportunity here to build on a situation, even if I'm not going to stay in that industry.
Yep.
I worked at a financial management company, and I remember the people that treated me kindly and the people that really berated me.
Yep. Yep.
So when I got into that position, I wanted to make sure I didn't do the same thing.
Yep.
I understood that to bring out the best of people, there does need to be boundaries. There needs to be that firmness. But I think there's a better way to draw out the best of people without being so militant.
Yeah, or without crushing people. You have to build people up versus step on them, for sure. There's I guess a meme out there where it talks about being a manager versus a leader, and like the manager is like screaming at his people or her people, and they're behind their people, almost like there's this one that I could think of they're behind the people with a whip, like saying go, go, where like a true leader stands in front of his people and pulls his people or her people along, right? And I think that you've seen both, great examples of people that you were admired and had helped you through that business or that career. And then you saw good examples of bad examples, people you wouldn't want to emulate, you wouldn't want to follow across the street. And so that really kind of helped shape you. And so now you're moving into, with Prime Purpose. When did you create Prime Purpose?
Prime Purpose was sort of a slow development, because I was actually coaching and having small group classes in my office for a while. A lot of that was more the spiritual development.
Yep.
But when I actually had a really hard time articulating this 3D purpose for a long time. It's like, okay, I know how it is for me, but how do I articulate this for other people? So the actual company name came together just within like the past year or so.
Okay.
And so when I got clear on how can I communicate this in a way that people see the value, because I know that not everybody watching this is going to really understand or really get it or even want to be a part of it, and that's totally fine.
Sure.
It's more, okay, how do I help people understand my journey of finding this 3D purpose? And guess what? It's flexible. You can take it into any place of influence. It could be government. I mean, I certainly I'm not a legislator, I'm not a lawyer, but I got to be in that realm for a little bit, working with these people for Lobby Day when I was doing the anti-trafficking. So I want people to be able to see that you're so much more than your position or your job. Yeah.
And people are multidimensional. It's not just the one thing, right? And so talk about the 3D philosophy or mindset. Where did that come from? Where did you either create or learn it, and how do you implement that in your day-to-day?
Sure. I started realizing when I did some research and looking at the people that I admire, and some of those are just like actual biblical characters. I mean, this is what I believe in, is that those people, even in ancient past, had a three-dimensional aspect of things. So you had your trade, but you also had this aspect of being sent for a purpose. For me, that was the anti-trafficking for 5 years. But the last part of it was the creative endeavor, which I think is also missing for a lot of people. Being a musician, obviously there's albums that I make, there's books that I've written, But I think people realize you don't have to be a creative person, so to speak, to have that be a big part of what can create a movement in your company, in your business, whatever it is that you have a passion for in life. And so people need to understand it could be new technologies, you know. It could be, you know, for someone in the medical field, if they discover a cure for something, I mean, it happens.
Yep.
And so I really want to empower people. And I know that this is actually going to step on some people's toes, but people have to move from a bureaucracy type environment in a corporation to seeing the potential in someone. Because most of the times they're overlooked because you got the status quo and the things that have always been.
Right. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Although it probably should be broken and fixed immediately.
Definitely.
As far as, you know, what is it that you set out to create or solve through Prime Purpose, and how are you serving, you know, your I don't know if you call them your clients or your partners, but how are you making that difference every day through the company?
Sure. What I want people to see is their own personal tailor-made journey.
Yep.
And that's why I created this book and this course. There's a course I have called Prime Purpose Formula for Job Success, and it's a little confusing because I'm not trying to teach people how to get a job or how to get into the next position. I'm teaching them how to look at their situation and look at it like a map, as this is where I'm at and where can I go from here, instead of I just hate the situation, I want to move up to the next place or the next company.
Right, try to run from there. Yeah.
Yeah, when it's like you have clues directly where you're at.
Yep.
In your company or in your business.
Yep. And so what is an engagement, or how do you help the people that you're serving through the business right now?
I think that they need to see, I see this all the time, especially people in corporate environments, and I want to help them to see that, okay, what you're dealing with is not just this person being nasty towards you, you know, or that, you know, I want to be in this different position, but wow, you're dealing with this employee because, wow, you're probably meant to be a mentor, you know, you're probably meant to bring up people up to this position, be able to see the potential that they have. So just opening up, to have eyes to see their situation differently. So when it is time for them to finally advance, they know exactly what to do. Yeah,
to have that roadmap, to have that experience. And so what has been some of the feedback you've gotten from some of your clients or people that have gone through the coaching process?
I think for most people, it's still too hard to digest. And so I try to break it down very simply as to, okay, my situation, I can't even leave my job. I can't even think about, like, I come home and I just go to sleep every day, or, you know, I can't even think about.
Start over again the next day, and they don't really think about how to transcend.
Yeah, I want to help them just say, okay, let's just do something simple. You know, a lot of times I just have these quick little tips on video to be like, okay, what can you do right now in your situation? You know, go take a break, you know, think about your own job situation, your project, what can you do in that situation? And then just go from there, little bite-sized pieces.
What do you feel is a good piece of advice, kind of blanket, so it's not so specific, with people that are just stuck? Like, so they're stuck in their career, they're stuck in a mode of life. They may want to change, or maybe they don't realize they need one, but like it's going to happen one way or another. So like, what's a good little piece of something that you can help people move through those stuck positions in life?
I think probably this seems like it's going backwards, but I think it helps people to have some kind of vision. That's one of the things it's what I say at the very end of my book after they've gone through this. But I think people need to have a place to go, a place to dream. And even if that vision changes, it's okay, because you at least have a framework. So I tell people I have this folder on my computer called Life Vision.
Okay.
And because I want to get people outside their heads of, okay, I want to be a musician, I want to be this and that. Whereas, you know, it's more like, I want to be able to buy a house, you know, or I want to be able to travel, or I want to take care of my health, things that maybe are not even necessarily related to work, but where you want to be long term. I remember when I was touring, I was like, there's things about music that I loved, but like there's aspects of the touring that were like, oh, this is just killing me.
Grind, yeah.
You know, I can't keep doing this. And so I thought, okay, this is what I want. I want to be able to have a crew and do all these things the next time I get to this position. So this helps articulate for people and have on paper, okay, this is what I want to work towards, and this is my situation right now. If I can't think about the whole system and structure and, you know, all the individual development, I just need to get through the day. Okay, so I have something positive to look towards.
Yeah, having that to look forward to is really important anywhere in life. I mean, because a lot of times people get stuck in the mud and the mire, and they're just like, they can't see past where they are. And if you can hang a goal, or if you can hang something in front of you that's worth working towards, it gets you through those feelings of being stuck sometimes, or feeling like you're spinning your wheels. Step after step, moment after moment, if you keep reaching towards it, like, it gives you a drive and a purpose, I think, that's bigger than yourself, which is huge. As far as looking, into what the book has done for you, creating the book, talk a little bit about kind of like the process of where the idea from the book came from, what the book kind of summarizes and what it can do for people, and how has that helped you in any way, shape, and form? Yeah.
Sure. The power of inclusion, it came actually from this image I had of a family friend. And he was stuck in this dark house, and he was working off of like fried chips, old motherboards. They look like computers from like the 1990s.
Yep.
And what I saw is he basically symbolizes someone who's stuck in their work environment, but he was also struggling with his family.
Sure.
Family relationships. They're integrated so much more than you think.
Yes.
So when I started dreaming up this book and thinking about, okay, there's stages. We can't possibly know how to go through that framework without understanding. So I started going through, okay, what was my journey like in the last 20 years?
Yep.
And I discovered that it's progression from understanding the system around you, of your work structure, the people around you, and then your own individual development. What I'm finding is a lot of coaching materials, they only focus on individual development without seeing this 360 view of what's going on around you. And that's so imperative. I think to create that culture of honor, what I talk about is that we're born into systems. We're born into families. And whether your situation as a family was good or bad, that's going to create the framework for how you relate to everybody else.
For sure.
So if you can't even do that, then forget about the individual development, because you're going to run into problems no matter what situation you're in.
Things that things that you're kind of, you feel like you're destined, but if you can get your mindset changed, and if you can look at these systems and these family systems or these business systems that you're implemented into, you can navigate them a little bit differently with that information. So as far as, what you've kind of looked forward to, in the future of Prime Purpose, and kind of what you're working on right now, like, how are those things coming to fruition for you? Have you felt like you've put into place this business that's really kind of helping people, and like, where do you see it going from here?
I've discovered that I can never ever put a cap on anything. Being an entrepreneur yourself, you understand it's like you can't ever get comfortable. And so I know that long term this is going to help a lot of people, because it's going to continually expand. But I'm not going to put any limits onto what I think. Like, I think it's going to be great to start with for corporate and job environments. But I definitely see going back into arts and entertainment. I see going back into a lot of different fields, and helping people in their families and relationships too, because this goes across the board. It's not just one area. What I really want to see, and I've seen this as a pattern in my life, even when I was doing a lot of the social justice activist events, is it's really about a few people at a time. And those people create the systemic change. To me, I don't mind reaching masses, but I'm really more concerned about, okay, those few people, am I helping them go as far as they possibly can? That's what I'm passionate about.
Making a huge difference, I think, and making a meaningful difference, and adding value to as much value as you can on one person, versus just kind of blanketed over a ton of people. You find more value in that. As far as obstacles that you're facing with scaling company, growing, anything that you're looking at, have you faced any of that, and how did you overcome those things?
Yeah, so much of what I do, again, as a pattern, is very much slow growth, but I prefer that because I want to see over time, like you said, having lasting change. I've noticed that anything that I've been involved with, it may not be super popular. It usually never is, but
kind of counterculture in a sense, like against
absolutely. Counterculture, and it's not something I really set out to do. It's just naturally who I am.
Yeah, a rebel at heart.
So, for me, I'm not so concerned about it being a super fast growth, but what I am concerned about is the concept of legacy.
Sure. Okay. What does that look like for you?
To me, I think success would be someone who comes into their own and takes it so much further than I could ever imagine.
Okay.
Part of that being a mom, you know, and with my child and the legacy that I have biologically, like that's something that gets me excited. But I think you can have spiritual children in a way.
Sure.
You think about every great company, whether it has been about profit or not, it's been sustained beyond the life of the actual minds is because they had family or people that really understood the vision and kept it going.
Yep.
So that's really what I'm about, is long, you know, when I'm long gone, that the vision of the idea still keeps going forward.
Keeps like honoring you and what you've created, but also it keeps the vision alive long beyond, you know, our time here. So as far as like people that you're listening to, interested in, like who's kind of helped you in your path and your journey with doing all these things that you have your hands in, you know, being a mom, being a business owner, being a creator, a musician, and there's so many things that you do. Who's been inspiring? Who's challenged you? Who have you taken from that's been able to help you grow in some of those capacities?
One of those people is Chalene Johnson. I actually discovered her when I was taking one of my breaks and trying to figure out, again, like, I know that not everybody has the capacity to be able to take time off. I'm very thankful that I have. But what I appreciate about her is she teaches people to build their businesses, but it's really mainly about helping people, helping you learn how to serve instead of building a product. I think the other thing I appreciate about her too is that she started in fitness and then moved over into teaching people. Her Marketing Impact Academy taught me so much about, okay, this is how I can reach somebody in a very, you know, genuine, authentic way and be myself.
Yep.
So that was a role model for me that, okay, she's also three-dimensional and she's still doing fitness stuff, but, you know, she's helped so many people understand how to scale their brand. So.
It was a good focal point to kind of like what your narrative is and that your belief system, it married over to kind of what she was working on and creating there. So if someone's looking to, you know, follow one path and then they get inspired to do something else, you know, they have a passion, they have, you know, so what is some advice you could give to somebody who's kind of traveling down a similar path of creation and working on things, and almost like a go-home message or something that you can leave with the listener or the viewer to say, hey, this is how you can work through this is how you can get around this is how to overcome this, just something to kind of help somebody. Yeah. Sure.
I would say to not try to figure it all out at once. I think it's totally okay. People need to realize there are seasons in life.
Yep.
And of course we can't be all of those different aspects of who we are. So if there's a season where you can only be one person, it's completely okay. It doesn't diminish who you are as a person. And to just be okay with that, be at rest with that.
Yep.
I think too, I had somebody on one of my live casts the other day about self-care, because I think it's so important, you know, in this corporate world or whatever, what have you, we get lost in it. Sometimes we forget to take care of ourselves. And I think people need to realize it's totally important and it's okay to do that. Take care of yourself. So if you can only focus on one thing, I remember when I had my child, obviously as a new mom, there's things I couldn't do for a certain amount of time.
Right. Yep.
And that was my season in life, and it's really okay. And if somebody has a problem with it, then that's their problem.
Yep. Yep.
So I would say definitely, you know, to take it easy, to be at rest with whatever season you're in, and just embrace it.
And almost in a sense, like grow where you're planted, like just kind of wherever you're at, make the most of it. Know that there's learning lessons in every pit stop in life. I think that's very well said. Now, as far as people, they want to learn more about Prime Purpose, Janie Liou, maybe hear your music or be a part of the revolution, so to speak, how would they find you or hear more about what you're doing?
Sure. Well, to find all of the aspects of the music and things, you can just go to janieliou.com. Okay. And then for my Prime Purpose, just to find the book, that's just myprimepurpose.com. I usually tell people HTTPS to find it, otherwise you don't know what's going to come up. But both of those websites, they can also find me on social media, which is all clearly notated there as well.
Awesome. Cool. Well, you've been very impactful. You've added a lot of value in terms of sharing your story and helping people really understand that it's okay if you feel like there's more than one thing you want to do, and it's okay to be a 3D person and not one-dimensional, and how to actually do that. So I'm excited to see you continue to build this and help more people and leave the world a little bit of a better place. So
thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. So she's Janie Liou. I'm Jesse T. Be sure to catch us on next week's episode of The Jesse T Show. Take care.